Don't send it yet. Just get everybody. Yeah. I can help a bit.
Are they started?
Yeah, looks like they started. All right.
Is that okay?
Yeah, we're good. We're all good.
All right, we're schmoving.
All right, Jared. How do you feel about your brother being in the round of 8?
Never thought we would get here, considering how I absolutely dumpstered him the last time we played pool in Colorado. I mean, pool. We played chess in Colorado. That's an entirely other different game that you play in a smoky, dimly lit room. What do you think about Anders not taking advantage of the fact that his pawns can move 2 spaces?
I mean, I think that Joel has looked into this a little bit. He has now achieved what we call the big center in chess, which is just like objectively winning.
Wasn't there somebody else in previous rounds that took advantage of the big center?
It was 100%. I think it was Wyatt, but he didn't exploit it to this extent. Wow, Joel is prepared. He's playing pretty much mainline theory, and Anders is going for more of a porcupine structure, which is like the most like trying not to lose position as black.
Now, as black, you have mentioned in the past that trying not to lose and we're going for draws is a beneficial strategy. Do you think that Anders is playing into that?
I think at this level, it is like the best idea. It is to try to play to not lose as black. But Bobby Fischer, one of the greatest chess players of all time, was under the opinion that black should always play for a win.
I mean, Bobby Fischer was also better than literally everybody else alive for a time. So
For quite a while. So you can
yeah,
see.
yes.
Okay, so this is now where Joel's prep is starting to fall apart a little bit because now he's improvising and he's pushing his kingside pawns, which is going to dramatically weaken his castle in the long run. But until now, he was doing really well. He's just having a hard time finding pawn breaks against this porcupine structure. And now, if you see that open file, the open G file, where it's like his king is directly in line for like a rook or a queen or anything coming at him. Yeah. Now we see the problems are going to start to happen. There's a lot of attacks that can happen. Like he could push, I don't know, like the f6 pawn. Like Anders could push the f6 pawn forward and then looks for some sort of an exchange and then get the queen onto the long diagonal eventually if he can get rid of that pawn. First, you have to get rid of the knight, though. Okay, this is interesting.
Do you trade here as black?
No, you definitely don't, because then if you trade, you get the queen on the open diagonal, and then suddenly white's position is like kind of okay. This is a good way to try to get rid of that knight if you start going for pawn pushes. Ooh, okay. Joel going for a battery, which is where you stack the rook on the queen or rooks on top of each other, or the queen on top of the rook. Just get 2 pieces that move horizontally on top of each other. Yep, this is winning 100%. Because if rook takes, queen takes, and you're just up a knight. So
And you're gonna check.
yeah, so Joel is just cleanly up a knight now. So +3 is decisively winning. You can just go for the check now, and just force the exchange. Ooh, I would have gone one more to g8 and force the rook to take, and then you can get a queen check, and then you're
What do you
just
think about taking pawn there?
I think that's also a perfectly reasonable move. Just my initial reaction is to try to get pieces off the board. Now that you're ahead, it's like the cleanest way to win is just exchanging to a win. So, but yeah, obviously taking the free pawn is, as Hikaru Nakamura, the #1 player in North America, would say, is just taking the juicer.
Well put. Well put.
Now this is interesting
Joel
because
applying pressure to the back row.
yeah, 100%. And now it's not so great if he trades rook because he gets the bishop sort of into a more defensive position for the king. He does want to run his king away though, Anders. I mean, he wants to get it. Yeah, exactly. That's the call. 100%. This is really good. Because now that king is super safe. He's created like a fortress on the queen side of the board now. You just take the rook here. And just you can like I guess exchange. It's not great, but it's because Joel is +3, so if Anders is initiating exchanges, it's not super optimal, but getting the queen and the rook off of the board at this level is going to dramatically reduce Joel's ability to win, just like statistically. Like checkmating lower level players trying to checkmate without their queen is like very funny. Oh, and Anders hangs his rook. Joel hangs his rook. Suddenly it's now in slightly Anders' favor, and this is the reality of that's the game.
Oh, disaster.
There's no
Tragedy strikes Gotham City as Joel loses the queen. He is in full panic mode, clearly mauling.
That bishop is hanging too. Oh, the bishop could have just taken it. The dark squared bishop could have just taken it.
True.
That was hanging. Yeah, this is just completely game.
This is just falling to pieces.
Yeah, Joel had such a good position, and the very classic mistake is Anders just played the porcupine, which as black is just pushing your pawns forward, not being too instigating, letting white decide what the pawn breaks are going to be, which is where you like push a pawn and have some pawns exchanging each other. And then Joel ended up getting a little bit too overeager and pushed his kingside pawns and dramatically weakened his king, and then went for some sort of an attack that just didn't have a numbers advantage and ended up blundering material. But he had
Not taking the castle there is interessante.
Yeah. The rook is hanging still.
Still not taking.
No one recognizes the hanging rook until now, but this is quickly gonna be mate. Queen g4. Okay. Or that, I guess. Trial and error will find the move that doesn't end up in check. I think we want to go back and do queen g8 and then queen g4 is going to be the best move. Like queen g4 for black here is pretty much just mate on the spot. Queen g4 is actually just mate on the spot. Right now, black queen g4 is just mate. Anders doesn't see it. There's still some hope, maybe. Could throw in a check here. The knight on c3. Oh, okay. I mean, this is swiftly going to be over. The rook is hanging. The dark squared bishop. Oh wow, not going for the hanging rook. One square short. There's not a whole lot of analysis left in this game. This is just sort of seeing whether or not Anders blunders substantially enough for Joel to come back, which is going to be really hard.
I think Anders played this game really well, understanding that if he just plays safe and looks for openings from major mistakes and taking advantage of them, that they will open up eventually. Because no one's really playing perfect chess in this level of play.
No, definitely not. And like you can see that even like what for even just middling level players, like where a +3 advantage is just technically winning. You know what I mean? Just theoretically winning. We can see that +3 is not nearly enough, and we might find out that +15 isn't enough if Anders fails to convert on this position.
Anders actually running out of time. 17 seconds left on the clock.
Is Joel adopted your strategy? He could throw in
Is
a
he
check
going
here
to
if he
dirty flag him? Anders in
actually good
check.
strat.
Time running out. 12 seconds left on the clock. 13 seconds.
Oh my
Rook comes
god.
across the board for the take.
Wait, Anders is throwing
Anders,
this.
10, 9,
Anders
8,
doesn't have enough
7,
material to mate.
6,
Anders doesn't have enough material to
8.5.
mate. Just throw in the check. Just throw in the check. Just throw in the check on c7. Rook to c7.
Joe has a minute 10. He doesn't need to panic. He
can just go rook c7 though. Rook c7 is just a check that forces the king to move.
10 seconds left on the clock for Anders.
God, I hope he finds it. That just hangs the knight. Oh, Anders didn't see it. Thank God.
Anders is in. I don't know if Anders necessarily realizes how dire his time situation is.
The knight is still hanging.
Anders down to 5.
Oh my god, it's hard to move out of checks. This is actually insane. Was +15 not enough?
6 seconds left on the clock for Anders. Anders in check. Anders running for his life. Anders with 7 seconds left on the board. Joel with a minute 4, clearly playing his time better. Anders 4, back up to 6. Rook comes across. Check. I don't know about this move at all.
It's defended by the knight, so it's actually totally
It is
fine.
defended by the knight. He's pushing off to the... Could you get like a repetition or like whatever that thing is? Oh. Anders clearly recognizing that he's in a time constraint, but still taking his time in some regards, putting pressure on that knight. 3 seconds left on the clock. 2. 4 seconds left on the clock for Anders. Joel running for his life. Anders 2. 1. Moving up 3 seconds. Anders just needs to be moving. He needs to be moving. Anders out of time.
I actually can't believe it. That's an insane
Anders
game.
taking a note out of the book of Emily and absolutely biffing a double-digit lead.
And Joel with the Jared strat fucking dirty flagging his opponent. Oh my god.
Like older brother, like younger brother.
Wow. I mean, That's an incredible game. Wow. I mean, the rightful winner of the game based on the early advantage is like a thing, but it's time to just hit rematch and keep going.
Just a series of who can absolutely throw harder.
That was the throwiest throw of my life.
Yeah.
Joel,
Okay.
you're not supposed to unmute yourself, you idiot.
Wait, it's between matches. It's fuck it.
Just click rematch. Yeah. I forgot Joel is the guy.
Quick rematch.
Fuck, dude, that's insane. Wow, we might be in for a really crazy series.
So we had the throw into the counter throw into the throw into the counter throw into the dirty flag. Truly a spectacle.
I mean, honest to God, that's just insane. That's actually just insane. I thought +3 was winning for Joel. He played for a big center. He had just absolutely commanding position, and then like completely destroyed his kingside castle that he had set up, and like opened up and like had terrible exchanges and ended up blundering material back and losing his queen. And then just out of nowhere, Anders is just like unable to convert off of a +15 advantage, which is just like beyond theoretically winning. It's just like impossible to lose that kind of a position. It's apparently not though. Oh, well, that just hangs your queen to the knight again. Joel has to get it together.
Joel is playing like a man who understands that he has a great capacity for throwing, but still managing to throw anyway.
It's actually insane that he hung his queen on on move 8.
Yeah, there was not exactly a confusing position. Everything was very clear on the board. The knight hadn't moved yet.
That's something, man. I mean, we'll see if he. I mean, he played out of this position in the last game. We'll see if Anders is just unable to convert on positions like this.
I did see a YouTube short of a guy who played a strategy where he sacked the queen in order to bait into a checkmate. I don't think that's what Joel was doing, though. Joel seems to just be, as the kids would say, sending it.
There's a term for that where you sacrifice your queen on purpose. It's called the Botez Gambit, named after the sisters, the Botez sisters, who are very good chess players. And the funny story about the Botez Gambit is that they call it the Botez Gambit, so it sounds like it's intentional, but really it's just when they it's really just when they hang their queen that they have a name for it, so it sounds like they did it on purpose.
Excellent. In a results-based industry such as chess, it really is all about winning. And if losing your queen is what it takes to win, by golly, we do it.
I think Anders is a bit more confident in this position with enough time on the clock. I think he's actually taking the chance with queen being hung early enough where he can actually try to convert here. It seems pretty straightforward to me, but we'll see how the players are able to do it.
Has spent a good 20 seconds on this turn, not taking his absolute time with everything. He is in a superior advantage. He has, such a high advantage that maybe he has the, luxury of taking this time. But after the last game, color me a little bit nervous.
This is actually interesting because now Joel's rook has the open H file, other than the knight that's now blocking. But that could prove to present some back rank mate problems later on. But this is just cleanup duty for Anders now. But we've seen him throw a +15, so a +12 is definitely not safe.
No, in this Corona Cat server, no lead is safe.
It's never enough. It's actually just never enough.
The world is never enough.
I mean, just take the pawn. No, you can take the pawn in front of the king with the d pawn, d3x e2, and just like get it right in front of the king, force the king out, start looking for checks. I don't know. There's something here that okay, interesting.
Indeed.
Not a ton of options here, unfortunately. I think you still just want to take that pawn in front of the white king. That's a move. That's a move. Definitely, that's a move.
Definitely a move.
It defends
Indeed.
It defends the pawn on g4 and it attacks the queen. So I actually don't hate it at all.
John going against all conventional John wisdom of having the knight up against the side of the board, complimenting a knight up against the side of the board.
It was it's long term. It's gonna present issues because now it's gonna be running out of effectiveness very quickly. This is a great time to get that rook in. Ooh, I would have loved to see an infiltration going all the way to c2 with that rook and just sort of skewering everything on the back rank like that. Want to be careful here. I think you can still afford to get in and also start taking that pawn in front of the king still. I'd love to see that as well. We are in check. You don't want to block with the rook because then you actually hang your rook on b8 because it's only defended by the bishop on d6. I think the best choice is just moving the king up. That's a fair option. That does defend everything. Andrews has got to be careful not to get his queen trapped. That's unbelievable. I told you back rank make problems. I literally said, I mentioned earlier on that back rank make problems are going to present themselves. A plus 17 advantage, dude. I can't imagine Andrews right now. That's actually unbelievable. That's actually unbelievable. There's a
Anders with the back-to-back double-digit disgusting throws.
Wow. And you know, all this comes first circle. Remember when I was saying that the pawn on d3 for black should have taken the pawn on e2 for white? And that would have forced the king out and destroyed that pawn line? If he had done that, there wouldn't have been this back rank mate option. So it actually ended up working out. My god.
That's a tough one for Anders. How do you come back from that mentally, John?
I think you just have to keep telling yourself that you're like better and that you're getting into like winning positions and that you just need to like not you need to like convert better. So it's like you have to think more carefully about like how you're converting on your lead. And it's like something that's obviously easier in review than doing it live in a live match. So hopefully Anders is able to go back to the drawing board and reflect on this game.
Anders has been buying too much into the hype of living in the moment and lacking a ton of foresight, it seems.
Yeah. Let's see if Joel misplays his big center again. He hasn't committed to a castle yet, but he is just pushing all of his pawns, going for some sort of a disgustingly weird paralleled structure here. Castling again after blowing up your kingside pawn structure is just very interesting to me, while Anders continues to slow advance this porcupine structure. Joel is going to run out of moves unless he comes up with a pawn break. He has to just like calculate for like 20 seconds on which of these pawns he can push and actually exchange. Like this one could open up the file or at least semi-open the file. I don't hate this. He could take, and then if the wrong pawn takes, he could win the rook on a7. So like for example, if right now Joel took the b5 pawn with his a4 pawn, and then Anders took back with the a6 pawn, the rook would hang on a7. I'm just looking for some ideas of how to play against this structure. It's almost as if Anders' pawns started on the 6th rank instead of the 7th rank.
True. This truly is a goofy-looking board.
It's something.
It is indeed something. I don't feel like it's good, but it is something.
No, you don't see these positions that often. This is a very, very unique structure.
In the words of Day 9, what in the hell in the fuck?
Okay, for once, Joel actually doesn't blunder his queen in one and picks up a free pawn.
Oh, the night is still young, John.
Maybe if Joel just doesn't blunder his queen, he'll find himself in consistently winning positions. And that's going to hang it immediately. Let's see if he notices that. I think he's hesitating. He's aware that he's blundered his queen 2 games in a row. So
and he moves it back to safety. He's beginning to believe.
Calmly move the queen back into a battery with the rook. I like to see it. This is disciplined chess we're seeing. It's interesting because most of the pieces are concentrated on the queen side. So although Joel blew up his king side pawn structure, none of the black pieces are on the king side that are actually threatening him. So it's actually still like his king is safe. But for example, if Anders pushes the c6 or the d6 pawn forward, he can start opening up diagonals for the queen and the light squared bishop on his king, which could definitely start to be a problem. We'll see though. Anders also doing a bit better on his time management this game.
Indubitably.
People just seem unwilling to exchange pawns. There's a lot of breaks here that could happen. Just Anders and Joel are just refusing to go for it on like A4 and B5, for example. Actually,
It is difficult to know when trading is the best move.
And Joel is locking down the structure. And to answer your question, I think trading when you're ahead is always the right answer. So like with Joel being +1 up right now, he should just be looking for exchanges whenever possible, unless they're really criminally bad. But like trading the knight for a knight or a bishop for a bishop or pawn for a pawn in this position is just winning eventually, because you'll end up with a pawn and they'll have nothing. Okay, that's not the best exchange. I don't like. Oh, that hangs the rook. Let's see if he notices the rook. The queen can take the rook. Oh, he misses it.
Ooh.
Which hangs the knight. He could
Ugh.
have taken on g4 with the queen on e6, but he missed it. Queens move backwards diagonally, apparently. Joel doesn't recognize that yet.
Could it be that he is in paralyzing fear of losing the queen and is unwilling to make any moves with it?
I hope not, because it's very infiltrated in the black position. Maybe we can get a perpetual here if Anders keeps checking back and forth, but I doubt that he'll do that. Interesting, moving the king into the open. That hangs the... Oh, he misses it again. He could have taken with the dark squared bishop on e3. e3x g1. He can still look for it.
This is something I noticed when Anders had Joel in a series of checks in the first game. Joel seems to really tunnel vision on moving the king once he is in check.
Yeah, there's multiple ways to get out of check, right? You can block the check if it's anything other than a knight, because knights jump over pieces. And then if you can't block the check, you can take the piece that's checking on, and then you can also move the king, obviously. But missing a lot of opportunities to take the piece that's giving the check is a bit hard. That's a great move, though. That's definitely the move. Defends the bishop, keeps everything, attacks the rook. Not a lot of great options for movement for that rook now. I think the only real option is h1, just to get it out of there. Yeah, he finds it. It's interesting how you make forward progress here. That doesn't actually hang the rook because the knight on c3 defends it. Yeah, that's a fine move too. This rook's under a lot of pressure now. I don't think it can escape. I think he's trapped the rook successfully. That's really unfortunate for Anders because he's got an advantage right now, but it's going to completely evaporate when he loses this rook. Yeah, that's a desperado move where you try to, when your piece is lost, you try to just take something with it before it goes.
It's like in checkers when you see that they've got you in two places, but you mark one of them anyway.
Yeah. The pawn is hanging on f6, but he doesn't realize it. It's interesting. I don't know. It's a very even game now. Joel has recouped his disadvantage once again, but we're getting a much more stable game. But again, Anders is just running out of time. I think he's just not appreciating how fast this format is. In our effort to dissuade cheating online, we have created a situation where people who like to take their time are struggling.
And you know what? Fuck them.
Yeah, that's a free pawn. Man, Joel is starting to clean up. Let's see how he converts on an advantage. Now, this is the first time we're going to see a really substantial advantage out of Joel. He had +3 in the first game, but now he has +5, so maybe it'll be a bit more
Do you
convincing.
just take the knight here with the a5 pawn?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. I like that. Very forcing, trying to get Anders to waste time finding these check moves. Like, Joel has played...
Anders, 10 seconds left on the clock. Disaster impending.
He's trying to figure out how to get out of this check without getting mated on the spot.
8 seconds left on the clock for Anders. I don't really see a way out of him in any kind of reasonable amount of time. He may just time out again.
Honestly, yeah, I don't think
Anders, with the biggest throw I've seen since Idra.
That just hangs the queen. Wow, that's mate in 1. He can just mate on d7. Yeah, that works too.
Joel spawning in the fake void race for the win.
Wow, that is not how I expected that series to go. Anders played really rock solid. Honestly, kudos to Anders. I just want to say, obviously, congratulations to Joel. We'll get a winner's interview in just a second, but man, Anders played one hell of a series. I think that with just a little bit more practice and getting a little bit more comfortable converting on advantages is going to be everything for him, because he played those porcupine structures with black, I think, really solidly.
Yeah, and I really think that just getting better handle of the format is something that a lot of our players would take great advantage of.
Yeah, it's really fast. It's a lot faster than you think it is, unless you're like playing bullet like all the time, like 1 minute chess with no increment. Then this seems like you have all the time in the world. But if you're not playing bullet, this is like very fast. But yeah, wow. I mean, this is the premier competitive online format. Is 3-2. That's what everybody does for Blitz, but it's still very fast for people who aren't as familiar. Let's see if we can get a winner's interview. Joel, how are you feeling?
Relieved. I was finding brand new ways of throwing that I didn't even know were possible.
Yeah, I think your brother has something to say about that.
Joel, sending your queen in and losing a turn 8, that really brings me back to you sending 20 Marines straight into a siege line. How did you recover mentally from that?
I guess that move in particular really gave me the, well, fuck it mentality. It actually brought me out of my, nervousness that I've been building for the past couple months.
Joel, playing like a man with nothing to lose, pulls it out in the end by dirty flagging him. Were you aware of Anders running out of time?
Yeah. So I thought if I just kept pressing it, if I could keep the tempo up, it would be harder for him to make a game plan.
I noticed that in this last game, when Anders was playing playing with the black pieces, he would like advance all of his pawns, creating this like very like pokey porcupine, what they call structure. How did you feel like your big center, like when you push the pawns and you get your knights on their active squares, you get the bishops out, you castle, like what was your game plan going into it in this final game? Because you seem to handle it much better now than you did in game one.
Well, that sort of entire full, military front is not something I see a lot online. So at first you saw I had a hard time defending it. The second time you saw me throw the queen trying to punch it, and then the third time is when I figured out actually how to punch it and wreak havoc back there. And so that helped a lot.
Yeah, I saw you attacking the weaknesses as Anders ended up having to eventually move some of his minor pieces. Yeah, that was
Mhm.
solid. Well, congratulations, Joel. I am happy to announce that you are the first player into the semifinals of the tournament.
Thank you. I'm
It's a
excited to play again.
big
We
accomplishment.
did it. I guess me, Megan, and Connor. Good job.
Are we live talking?
Yeah.
That's it for us here. Congratulations,
Hey, good
Joel.
job. We
Absolutely
can't hear
amazing match.
anything
Thank you,
at
Jared.
all, but good job.
Go.